Welcome into the Simmons Scoop. We have Director of Recruiting Chad Simmons. He's finally off the road. We got him sat down, and today we're going to talk about three teams. We're talking Georgia recruiting, Auburn, and Alabama. But before we get into it, guys, you guys do me a favor right now. Hit subscribe to the On3 Recruit channel. This is the best recruiting channel on all of YouTube, and we want you to be subscribed, so jump on board. All right, let's bring in the great Chad Simmons, and we are starting with Georgia. Because just before we sat down, Jackson Canwell tweeted that he is adding another official visit. So after saying, I don't really need to take any more official visits, he's scheduled two. He'll be at Oregon this weekend, and then he will take one to Georgia before making a decision. But what does this wrinkle in his recruitment tell you, Chad?
To me, it's just a good sign for Georgia. You have to take it as a good sign. If you're Kirby Smart, Stacy Searles, the staff in Athens, obviously he's been to Georgia as much as anywhere, maybe outside of Missouri. So he knows all about the staff at Georgia, the people in Athens, their style, their mentality, how they play, how they practice, how they coach, So I think all of his questions about Georgia, for the most part, have been answered. So I think obviously he went back to Ohio State, Michigan, and Miami earlier this spring, going back to Oregon this weekend. Then he was supposed to commit days later, now postponing that back to May 13th, going back to Georgia May 10th. If you're a Georgia coach, you're a Georgia fan, Georgia supporter, you have to like this.
Crazy news on the eve of his trip to Oregon. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But what does this mean, or does it mean anything for the recruitment of Jared Curtis, who's going to come off the board on May 5th? He's the number one quarterback in America. He was previously committed to Georgia, but it's a two-team race between Oregon and Georgia.
Yeah, I don't know if it means anything. They're two separate five stars kind of doing their own thing, but they happen to end up liking two of the same schools at the end. We've had Miami picking up some steam for Cantwell. It's been pretty black and white for Jared Curtis for some time. Georgia versus Oregon. Does he go back and commit to Georgia for a second time? Does he go out west, Pacific Northwest to Oregon and leave his hometown of Nashville and head north? As Dan Lanning, former DC for Kirby Smart and national championship team, versus Kirby Smart, and this one's had some ebbs and flows to where we thought when he decommitted, the odds of guys going back to the same school are never that high. We've seen guys do it in recent years. It happens. It wouldn't be out of left field from to see him go back to Georgia, but at one time we thought Oregon was clearly in the driver's seat. Then it's kind of swung back to Georgia. Then it's gone back and forth since then. Oregon, Georgia. We hear that he'll meet with both coaching staffs one last time, just one day before he announces that commitment. And I think a lot will happen in those final meetings. But I do not really think anything goes hand in hand with Cantwell and Jared Curtis. Could they end up at the same school? Yes. Could they go opposite ways? Yes. But both have a lot of Georgia fans watching them right now.
Yeah, that is going to be one high pressure in-home visit day for Jared Curtis. All right, let's talk about Tyler Atkinson. How should Georgia fans feel? I mean, we knew he was going to take all these visits, but he has taken all these visits. Has anything given you any indication that Georgia fans should be worried about where number one linebacker Tyler Atkinson is going to end up?
Yeah, I'll start with this. In today's age of recruiting, if you're a fan, you have to be worried to some extent until the paperwork is signed, come December. I think Georgia has been a constant with Tyler Atkinson being a school that's less than an hour from home for him at Grayson High School in Loganville. And he's been to Georgia more than anywhere else. But like you said, he's taken trips, most recently to Ohio State. He's been to USC. He's been to Oregon. He's been to Miami. Auburn's always been in this. Numerous schools are really giving a strong pitch to Tyler Atkinson. And for me, putting pieces together and digging behind the scenes, if I'm a Georgia fan or what I'm saying right now is I don't think Georgia is in as good of a spot today as they have been in the past. I've heard a lot of buzz about Ohio State since that multi-day trip to Columbus. That's always been a school high on his list. Oregon made a very big first impression as well. Atkinson still ironing out the details and figuring out how many OVs he wants to take, when he wants to lock those in. Ultimately, he wants to commit, before his senior season. But look, Georgia's in this to me, they're not the clear-cut favorite, maybe that they once were, but they're
Hmm.
one of the schools in that top group. You have to keep an eye on schools like Ohio State, like Oregon and some others.
All right. Now let's round out this Georgia segment by talking a little bit about the tight end position. Mark Bowman, Caden Prothro, both still on the board for the Dogs. Do you think that they have a shot at landing both, or would you say they have a better shot at one over the other?
Yeah, I think both are very much in play, Josh. Obviously, Lincoln Keys is already committed to Georgia a few months ago, and he's still feeling good about the Bulldogs, and he's kind of locked in with Todd Hartley, Kirby Smart, and that staff at Georgia. But Georgia would love nothing more than have a three-headed monster with Lincoln Keys, Mark Bowman, and Caden Prothro. They're all kind of different in what they bring to the table. Some even think Prothro could be a big wide receiver on the outside or a mismatch guy at that
Mm-hmm.
tight end position. So, look, Georgia's not going to turn any of those guys away. I can say that with a lot of confidence, and they're very much in play for both. I think starting with Bowman, who was back at Georgia for G-Day earlier this month. I mean, right now it seems to be Texas versus Georgia. You cannot sleep on USC. They're very much involved trying to work that angle of staying home in Southern California. He has family there, family in San Diego as well. So they're trying to use that angle. Obviously, he loves SEC football. He had a great 3.5 to 4 day visit to Austin earlier this month. He was back at Georgia. He's been there multiple times. He loves the tight end usage in both offenses at Georgia and Texas. But I would lean slightly today in favor of Georgia over Texas. I felt Texas had the edge when he left Austin. Now, Georgia had the last visit. Now I like Georgia's spot based on the feedback I'm getting there. So we'll see where the visits lead this, but I expect Texas and Georgia and USC to be in this until the end. And on Pro Throw, there's still 5 teams involved. Obviously, you have Alabama, Auburn, Florida, and Texas, and you have Georgia, the in-state school. He's been there the most. He loves the relationships. Look, he loves to compete. I think this was a little bit more open to multiple schools, more than maybe Bowman with Texas versus Georgia with USC right there. I think Alabama's done a great job. I think Auburn's done a great job. He went to Texas for the first time this spring. They opened his eyes on that trip to Austin, Texas as well. Then you have Florida. So I think the OVs for Prothro will carry a lot of weight for him and his family. But Georgia, as much as anyone, is in this race.
All right, let's talk a little Auburn Tiger recruiting, and we're going to start with the number 1 player in the On3 rankings. That's edge Zion Elely, and yes, he's committed to Maryland. He's doubled down on that a couple times, but Auburn has a foot in the door, Chad. Do you see Auburn staying in this recruitment despite his double down on Maryland?
I mean, they're going to try. There's no doubt about that. They're going to go all in, continue to recruit Zion. Look, there's still communication going on. To what extent? Hard to know on what you hear, but we do know that, he'll answer their call or he'll call them back, and there is communication going on between that Auburn staff and Zion Elely. And we also know that he has a teammate, committed there right now. He had 3 teammates sign with Auburn in 2025. So there's a lot of connections and comfortability there for Zion at Auburn. All I'm hearing right now is, even though Zion is saying that, like you said, double down, locked in with Maryland, may not take visits. I'm hearing that Auburn still expects him to take that official visit to Auburn, as some other schools do too. And then we'll see what happens in the next 5 or 6 months as the season plays out and signing day approaches. But right now, we know there's still communication going on between Elely and Auburn.
Yeah, and Hugh Freeze is no stranger to jumping in these 5-star foot battles. And like you said, they have those connections to the school, and I think as long as they just have their foot in the door, that's all Auburn fans need in April. There's still a long way to go on this one. All right, let's talk about Tyler Atkinson, and I know he's a Georgia lead. He's been out to Ohio State, but talking to Auburn insiders, they will mention that you got to watch Tyler Atkinson and Auburn. What does the Tigers have going for them with the number 1 linebacker in the country?
Well, I mean, obviously it starts with, Kenyatta Watson, a former, coach at Grayson High School, grew up in that little league area, knows the family, knows the people, knows the community. Those kids trust him. Like, he's been a big player for Auburn and some of their success in recruiting. I mean, he was on the road last fall, going out to Gwinnett County to see players during the season. So look, he's a guy that kind of links Auburn to Tyler Atkinson. There's more to it. Obviously it's close to home. It's an SEC program. He sees a chance to play. He knows people on the team. So a lot of things play into Auburn being a school of interest for Tyler Atkinson, but I think it starts with Kenyatta. Location's a big deal. Relationships are key here in this race. And look, this one has become a little bit more open than maybe we thought a few months ago. We kind of always painted Georgia as the clear team to beat. Auburn's always been mentioned as a school to watch by myself, Steve Wiltfong, and others in the industry. Mm-hmm. But we see this now a little bit more open, maybe not clear-cut Georgia the favorite, maybe Ohio State's up there, maybe Oregon, maybe some other schools like Auburn. So Auburn has to love to hear that. They've always been a school in this, and now if things are more open than ever, they're right there in the thick of this race.
Yeah, and from my understanding, Tyler Atkinson, we don't expect him to come off the board until late summer, early fall at the earliest. Is that kind of the timeline you understand?
Yeah, he's still trying to work out just, again, how many OVs he takes and kind of who he takes them to. But in the end, if he puts multiple hats on the table, we like Auburn to have one of those spots right now.
Okay. It's a good place to be. All right, let's talk about one of the in-state priorities, edge Anthony Tank Jones. We know Alabama and Auburn are duking it out over him, but are there any out-of-state teams involved in this one as well?
Yeah, we've talked about, schools like LSU. He's been there, Texas A&M, Oregon's a new one. We're talking about a little bit too. But everybody I talk to still kind of points to it. It has to start at home, like you mentioned, the in-state schools with Alabama, versus Auburn. He's been to Auburn multiple times. He likes the staff. Again, like Tyler Atkinson, Tank, as they call him, sees a path to the field and to make an early impact. He saw what Hugh Freeze did last year with multiple true freshmen making big impacts on the team. They're going to play the best players, and Tank, like anybody else, wants to get on the field, but they're making that pitch to be, a face of the program, come in and make an early impact. And Auburn, I think, is right there battling for that top spot with their in-state rival, Alabama.
All right, another big battle that Auburn's maybe battling for the top spot in is Braylon Womack, the number one player in the state of the number two player in the state of Mississippi, the number one safety in America. A lot of people think it's Ohio State, but Auburn, they're in this thing.
Yeah, they're very much in. Look, he's focused on 4 teams. So if you want to look at it by math terms, everybody has a 25% chance across the board to land Braylon Womack. Look, he took that visit to Ohio State, loved it, came off that visit calling the Buckeyes his top school. Mm-hmm. Look, we all know about Josh. You and I have been in this for a long time. The visit high, when kids talk about that trip, when they're still sometimes on campus, just hours away from Columbus, wherever they're at, they're going to say all the right things and sometimes get caught up in their emotions and speak a little bit too quickly. But look, Ohio State definitely set the bar high there. He loves what they're doing in the secondary, coming off a national championship, how their team prepares and practices. But what they don't have that Auburn has is family on campus. So, his sister just transferred to Auburn to play softball for the Auburn Tigers. So what Ohio State can't offer, what Texas A&M can't offer, what Florida can't offer, Auburn can offer. And that's putting 2 siblings together on one campus for mom and dad. So right now, even though Braylon's not there on football visits every time, a couple times every month right now, he's at Auburn watching his sister play softball with mom and dad. So that's just something that they offer, nobody else can. Mm-hmm. Look, he sees the relationships. He likes SEC football. He's been to Auburn as a recruit multiple times. He likes the staff. Obviously, he knows about Hugh Freeze's success at Ole Miss and then Liberty in the past and what he can build as a program. But I think the connection you have to watch there is that sister now at Auburn, which makes it easier for mom and dad, if Braylon went there, to see both kids at one stop.
All right, let's wrap it up with a Auburn commitment. Jamichael Garrett, he's a linebacker committed to Auburn, but I know Miami's involved here. There's a couple teams that are trying to flip him. What's your take on Jamichael Garrett?
Well, he just made the move, obviously, back to Louisiana, now living in New Orleans, going to Edna Carr, a state power there in the boot state. Look, he's committed to Auburn. He's at Miami right now as we record this, Josh, first time down in Coral Gables. He'll be there for a day or two, looking to return for an OV at some point in June. Right now it's set for June 20th. He wants to maybe move that up to June 6th potentially, and get back sooner than later. He'll go from Miami. He's on spring break right now, right to Texas A&M. He's been to College Station earlier this spring. Mike Elko and that staff, Coach Bateman, making him a big priority there for the Aggies at linebacker as well. He's mentioned Louisville. He's mentioned Oregon. He's mentioned Texas as other schools in the mix. Look, he's committed to Auburn. Communication is still pretty consistent there. I don't think he's as strong as he once was to Auburn in this commitment. So we'll see kind of where these visits lead this recruitment. But right now, he definitely would be one to watch if I'm an Auburn fan.
Let's talk some Alabama Crimson Tide recruiting. Last year at this time, Keon Russell, well, his name was probably on the QB board. It definitely wasn't at the top of the board, and he definitely wasn't a priority. But things started to heat up through the summer, and obviously we know how that recruitment ended. So I'm going to ask you, is Bama in contact with five-star Houston quarterback commitment Keshan Henderson? Is this kind of another one of these five-star flip recruitments that could go Alabama's way in the end?
Yeah, I think Alabama, like a lot of other schools, want to be in contact with Keshan. Everything I hear still points to him being solid with Houston. Look, has there been schools reaching out? Does he respond some? Yes, but right now, nobody throughout this spring has gotten him on campus yet. Yeah. And I think you and I both thought that would happen at some point, March, April. We still have a few more days in April, obviously May, June for officials and things like that. But look, Bama's been involved. They're still evaluating quarterbacks, whether it be Keshan Henderson, communication with Texas commit Dia Bell. I just had Derek Zammit was on the board. He committed to Washington recently. There's been other guys that they're still communicating with. Faison Brandon, 5-star committed to Tennessee. So I think Bama is likely to sign a quarterback this cycle. Will it be Keshan? Odds aren't very high, for that happening right now. But like we said earlier, there's still a long way to go in this recruitment, and we'll see how it plays out.
And because they signed a 5-star to Keon Russell last cycle, it gives Alabama the ability to do what they're doing, which is kind of just sit back and wait and see how things shake out and remember what happened last year. And I'm interested to see who Bama signs at quarterback. All right, we're moving on. Wide receiver, Cedarian Morgan. We talk about him a lot on this channel. Is he going to come off the board soon?
I think still the plan is to, what I'm being told, enjoy the process, take the visits, take the officials, and then make that decision. Look, we know obviously that things change in a hurry and guys can be on a visit, get caught up, make that decision or have a conversation. Now we have guys going in home right now doing visits with kids on the spring evaluation period, and that could lead to a decision as well. But right now, what I'm hearing, two things. He plans to take more time, take more visits, but also hearing that Bama is setting the pace in this race. And look, I think obviously the recruitment, could not have gone better, I think, so far from Alabama, from the offensive staff to the head coach. Just what they're doing from a relationship standpoint, obviously the history going back to Washington, how they developed wide receivers, getting guys drafted first round. Coach Jamarcus Shepard, I think, has the best relationship with Cedarian Morgan. And we've been hearing for a while it's Auburn versus Alabama. And I think Alabama is the lead team right now for Morgan.
Let's flip to the other side of the ball and talk about Jet Washington. One of the top DB targets on Bama's board was on campus recently. It's easy to see why he's such a coveted prospect. 6'4.5", 200 pounds back there in the secondary. He's from Bishop Gorman in Las Vegas, though. Where do you think the Tide sit for this one?
Yeah, I'm excited. I'll be out there at Bishop Gorman this time next week, watching them work out in their pro day. And they have a lot of top guys like every year. And Jet's the top guy, the lead guy for Bishop Gorman this cycle. Look, he was at Bama recently. He's been to USC, Texas A&M, fresh off a trip to Oregon this past weekend. I think Bama is in that top group. I would put Bama up there right now with Oregon. Maybe if there was a top two, I think USC did a great job getting their foot in the door in this race as well. he's still trying to figure out too, a lot like the other guys we talked about how many OVs he wants to take. He said that Bama will get one, Oregon will get one, USC is expected to get one. But I might lean slightly towards Oregon after these 4 spring trips, but Bama is right there in that top group of schools. Bama still has some big decisions to make about who they want to go after and make a priority as far as safeties goes, and Jets in that discussion for sure.
All right, let's wrap this up by going to the offensive trenches. Malachi Lee is a priority, 6'7", 310-pound offensive tackle. How's Alabama looking here?
Yeah, he's a monster. Obviously he's from Hawaii. And the interesting thing here is I'm hearing about the 2 schools the most are Alabama and Georgia, 2 SEC programs that both had him on campus for spring unofficials. He's locked in OVs to both Tuscaloosa and Athens as well. Georgia was out to see him in person earlier this week. Bama's going to see him in person next week. So this could be, for one of the best players in Hawaii, a battle of SEC powers in Alabama and Georgia. Coach Cap's doing a great job talking with the family. Obviously, Lee himself has a good relationship. He likes SEC football. We know about Alabama's history developing offensive linemen. They'll play guys early in their career on the offensive line. He likes that as well. So for me, it looks like right now 2 SEC schools are battling. He'll take some other trips as well. But Alabama will see him next week and then get him back on campus again for an OB this summer. Yeah. And we expect a decision sometime late this summer.
And Bama looks like they are shaping up to have another hot summer, so we'll see what happens. Chad Simmons, thank you for dropping by on the Simmons Scoop today. Appreciate you.
Thank you.